Welcome to today's Molly Tommy panel discussion on LGBTQ plus inclusion and support in schools, creating safe and welcoming environments. Our focus today is on fostering educational spaces where every student feels valued, respected, and empowered, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We have a distinguished panel of experts here to share their insights, experiences, and strategies for building more inclusive schools. Let's dive into this important conversation together. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Molly Tommy monthly panel. If everyone could please take a moment to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your background in the field of education. Let's start out with Josh.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Joshua Magallanes. I use he, him, él pronouns. I live in Seattle, Washington currently, but originally from the AZ. I'm a Southern Arizona boy. I've been in higher education for the last 25 years, and I've carried various roles. I am currently a mental health or licensed mental health therapist. I own a practice, and I work with individuals, adults, and adolescents. I coach sports. I coach high school softball, girls softball at Seattle Prep. And at Highline, I'm also a faculty member where I provide therapy or counseling for students and consult with faculty on various topics. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Heather. And I look forward to today's conversation.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead and jump right in. Gina?
Sure. I'm Gina Reed. I don't really have a background in education other than I sat on the Maricopa Community College's first scholarship that they offered to young people back in the early 2000s, which was called the Out Scholarship. I was one of the founding volunteers, though, of 1 in 10, which is an LGBTQ plus organization for youth, and we are turning 30 this year.
Great, thank you. Martin?
Sure. Hey, everybody, welcome to this event. I'm glad to be here. My name is Dr. Martin Tees. I go by he, him, and his pronouns. I, too, am a native of Arizona, Phoenix born, Central High School, so I don't know if we got some Bobcats in the house. And actually I did go to Brophy, and I went to Catholic school at St. Gregory. So any relationships there, of which I do think I have one with Mr. Robinson, who's here as well. But I've been in higher education now at my current role for 4 years. I came to NAU. I'm an alum of NAU. And I came back after being away for quite some time to work as the coordinator for LGBTQI plus student services. And now I'm serving in a role as the program manager working with men of color in higher education. We have a large disparity with them being able to be enrolled, retained, and graduated for lots of various reasons. And this does include and encompass those who are members of the LGBTQI plus community. I've had the pleasure of the last 4 years working on and doing trainings on all different things related to LGBTQ, from transgender to non-binary, gender non-conforming, sexual orientation, being inclusive, pronouns, what all the letters and the category means. So there's been lots to it. So I will stop right there, but thank you for having me.
Thank you. And last but not least, Lawrence.
So I appreciate being invited. I think that my hat that I wear most proudly in education would actually be that of being an uncle. I'm an uncle of 3 nephews who have not actually self-identified as one sexual orientation or another, but they have dealt with issues that I know every student who is LGBT deals with, from bullying, from feeling accepted, from having issues with their identity being relatable to their educator. That's number 1. Number 2, I am a proud school board member and a dog parent here. and as a school board member for the last 10 years, I've helped to transform an urban school district that had some challenges with our LGBT students into one that is very proudly LGBT affirming. And a longtime board member of 1 in 10 and staff member of everyone from Mayor of Phoenix to the legislative caucus at the legislature here at home in Arizona. So proudly an education advocate and LGBT person. So thank you for having me on this panel.
Thank you. Well, we'll jump right into it. We all know it's back to school season. Almost, if you're in Arizona, school has started. If you're in other parts of the country, sometimes school starts a little bit later in September. So we want to start out by talking about what challenges do LGBTQ plus students face during this back to school time, during this transition, and how can those challenges be minimized? We'll let anyone hop right in there.
I mean, if I can, I guess I'll start. One of the things that we do here at the university is that we've worked on, and we've had people who have helped to create, our trainings where we help faculty, staff, and incoming students understand, what the different identities are and how to explain. So definitely it starts with pronouns, but also finding ways in which we share placards. If one has gone through like a safe zone training, we do a transparency zone training. In those ways, and having those placards and having and asking faculty to use pronouns, I think is the first inviting way that our students are able to express themselves if they have not already identified in any particular way. But then the other part is I teach a class, and when I teach, one of the things that I do when I start meeting the students is asking them how they identify in such a way, whether it's, by their first name, whether it's by a certain pronoun, or whether it's different than what comes across on my roster. And generally, I think those are the ways that we've been teaching people, and also helping students understand, and ease the comfort when they come into the classroom, when they come to the university.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah. Hi, Heather. I think many of the youth that I navigate daily therapy with or spaces with are constantly worried about how will they be perceived, right? I think at the basic level, and even I can think about my K-12 experience in Arizona, like how is it going to be perceived, right, from one year to the next? Did I grow? Did I change physically? Have I chosen to express myself differently? And so how will that be perceived and how will that be received? And I think acknowledging what that difference is like for that individual. So I think there's that, right, which is high anxiety. And when folks in the K-12 system in particular are trying to already find meaning and community and acceptance, right? Like you add that on top and it just adds to the, and for some of my students, they say, I don't know that I want to go back to that school. I want to change schools. It's not as open. And then fear of like, is that person who I had beef with in spring going to be there in fall, right? And so I think really trying to acknowledge what they're going through, but also let them know like, yeah, that's real stuff and it's going to be present. And so how do you make it work for you? And that's a lot of the work that I do in my individual work here. And at the college, it's kind of the same thing. I work at a community college and, it's the same type of thing. And what's different, I think, with the community college versus our K-12 system and even the four-year university, right, is it's so transient, meaning, right, like we have commuter students who go to school and then leave. So there's really that disconnect from that community building. And so I think there's that, like, will I be seen? Will I be heard? Will I find people that look like me? And does this institution really have policies in place that will support me? I really think that those are the main things that I hear from the individuals that I work with.
I just wanted to piggyback off what Joshua said. I think it is fundamental that the institution reflects its values and not just shies away from them. And so whether it be something as trivial to many of us working in LGBT sectors for so long as wearing a ribbon if you're an ally, or even the district acknowledging a month to celebrate our our individuality, our LGBTness. I think that that's crucial. And I think that a lot of institutions have played the sanitary and safe role where they don't acknowledge us at all. We have the protections on paper, but we don't have the visibility in small ways, whether it's acknowledging someone's marriage at a school board meeting, who may be of same-sex marriage, or acknowledging the fact that someone adopted a child, and saying who they adopted it with. Those little cues really stick with people, and make not only the workplace a much better place, but the kids are receiving the signal that they can too grow up to be adults who are normal, quote unquote.
Yeah, I love that. Gina, do you have anything to add?
Well, I mostly work with younger people. And in fact, we have now a junior high here at our youth center. And so what I see from them is that their peers are usually pretty supportive, but unfortunately, we're in a climate where school boards are terrified that if one parent makes a complaint, then it causes all kinds of repercussions in the school. And so they're afraid to acknowledge a youth's pronouns if they differ from what they perceive that youth to be. Even when the parents, because I run the parents group too, even when the parents go to the school and say, I want, here's my child's pronouns, and I would like you to call them whatever the name happens to be, and it differs from the birth certificate, and they're just afraid to do all of that. So it starts very young, and it has to be the parents going and finding out what the policies are, really looking at the policies and making sure that there are guidelines that cover everyone. And if it doesn't, then finding a school that does.
Yeah, I agree. I have two children that are in school too. One just started high school. So as Joshua stated, I know the anxiety that the kids go through, and particularly worrying about being bullied. So I want to talk just one question about addressing bullying and discrimination. What are some effective strategies to address bullying and discrimination specifically against LGBTQ plus students?
I do feel that going back to what Dr. Tees, did I say that right? Said is that if all schools have safe space guidelines, it covers everybody in class. And the thing with 1 in 10 is every single one of our programs goes over the safe space guidelines every single night. So every time we meet, they're going over them. And so all of those things are inclusive. It's things like our youth came up with them themselves. One diva, one mic. It's always sunny where there's no shade, meaning we don't say disempowering things about other people. And if you have those, and you even if it's just each classroom coming up with their guidelines and the teacher helping to steer them a little bit, if you print and you put those guidelines up somewhere, all you have to do, I've noticed over the years, is just say, when somebody's starting to get out of line a little bit, you just go, hey, safe space guidelines. And what we've found is that rarely do the staff have to say, hey, you're violating safe space guidelines. It's the youth that do them themselves, because they know those in and out, because we go over them every time. And it saves tons of time for a teacher if they would just allow teachers to do that.
Yeah, I think Gina hit the secret weapon nail on the head here. I think it's the kids. The kids, every generation, thank God, has been, I believe, more progressive than the last. And the rights that we've gained in this generation are built upon the struggle of the generation previous to us. And so the kids that I know and I meet in the Roosevelt School District, or who are my nephews, any one of the three of my nephews' ages, they are all there already. They're as inclusive as they can be. And so I think putting the kids first, if we have a right wing and a radical fringe of this country that wants to talk about the parents' rights, I think that what we should talk about is the kids' rights, our children's rights. And they're the ones there to be educated, and they're the ones we're supposedly providing the safe space for. And so I think if kids are able to say what experience they've had in being bullied, testifying at school board meetings, we don't need the large organization, although, thank you for 1 in 10, and, an excellent org. It can be the Heather Brown family, right, who brings their child to the school board meeting and starts a movement by letting their child's voice be heard. So I think if we let the kids say what they want and what they're afraid of and what they need protection for, and really what they affirm, then I think that our movement will do so much better than if it's just the adult trying to message for them.
Thank you. Yeah. Joshua and Dr. Tiza, I'm very curious to know on a collegiate level how this comes into play.
Well, we have a zero tolerance at Highline College, right? And so there's that. And that said, and it's such a utopic though statement, right? Because we can still have a zero tolerance and things still do slip through. And so I think acknowledging that it's real and it's happening, it's still 2023. I live in Seattle, which again, right, we want to be so proud and excited that we are so supportive and everybody is held as safe as possible. But the reality is that there are still folks who don't believe and think that way. We're seeing it politically, we're seeing it nationally. And so I think all of the safe zones and safe space, and those are great programs to have as an additive to really add icing on the cake to what we're providing for youth. But the reality is we need to acknowledge that institutions, right, make decisions, and that's where we really need to start. We need to, I think, as you were saying, Mr. Robinson, allow students to tell individuals in administration that this is really happening, and what is happening, and be specific and explicit as possible, right? Because what I know as a therapist is that if individuals don't share that, right, I see it 25 years later show up with lack of self-confidence, worth, depression, anxiety, etc. And in many cases, right, individuals dying by suicide. And so if we don't acknowledge that it is still happening and it is real, I think that's a place where we should really enter and start.
I'll agree. I think that a couple of things. I think that when we ever start any of our trainings, one of the things I like the policies that you have. And I think, did you say something? I was trying to write it down, but something about being sunny and there's no shade in the sunshine or something. I thought that's really cool. So I'm gonna admit to I'm gonna steal that once I figure out what it is, but I'll give proper tribute to where I found it. But I also think one of the bigger things is to really address the topic at hand. Is to also understand that one of the things that we talk about is the difference between a safe space and a brave space. And I think part of that bravery in that space is to be able to outline and talk about what bullying is and what those effects are. At the same time, having those families, whether it's 1, 2, or 10, being able to come and really talk about the ways in which their student or their students for themselves are experiencing, whatever the case may be. So I think being able to do that and helping them to name it. But then also the other part of it is that I think when you're looking at the institution and you're looking at the policy procedures, I think zero tolerance, I just was in a meeting, zero tolerance is one of those things that they tried to throw back on us. In regards to, and if it's zero tolerance for one, then it has to be zero tolerance for all. So if someone who's of the LGBT community is bullying another member of the LGBT community, then do they get the same reprimand that whether someone who does not identify that way is? So there's conversations and things that we have to look at that way. But I think certainly in trying to address it, really does come down to empowering our students and empowering ourselves to be there for them, and one of the things I'll always say is that what I do find with this generation, as was mentioned earlier, is that they are progressively, I think, getting better. than the generation before them. But I think it's interesting, and I say that in quotes, and ironically, that the same struggle is still there. It's just a question of, how are we be able to work our way through it? Because certainly, I'm only 28 years old, but I'm not. These conversations that we're having now are conversations that we're having then. The only difference is I think that there's more people who are being vocal and protective of our students that are in the LGBTQI plus community in a way that they may not have been before.
Mhm. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And Lawrence, you talked about, what parents can do or what we can do as a family coming and speaking at school boards. So our next question has to do with parents and guardians. So how can parents and guardians be more involved in fostering this supportive environment for our LGBTQ plus students? So some other ways that we can be involved and help.
Well, you did mention my name, so I will go ahead and
Yes.
I'll throw an easy answer. And it's so funny because you grow up as LGBT, and for many of us, and then you go away to the institution and you gain the $3 words, and then and the theories, and then which wave is correct, to discuss our movement now, and then you come back to a local school board like I've done in the last 10 years, and you realize everything you did learn in kindergarten. Right? It really is some of the bread and butter basics of just showing up. So if I know that a LGBTQ family or parent is the head of the PTO at a school, I think, wow, we've really come somewhere. Or I see a student address their graduating or promoting rather eighth grade class, and they talk about themselves as LGBTQ. It's when we're just ourselves, and we don't have to just wear the banner, but we can wear our full banner. I think that we're the strongest. And so I think if parents are showing up to the bake sales and to the school board meetings, and taking on the committee shifts, and just being vocal, and actually and particularly being allies of other movements, causes, and families, then we've become the part of the fabric of the rest of the community. And that basic example is, I think, what we need to do.
100%. I mean, I think I've done some work with various school districts here in Washington State, and it is going into those most vulnerable districts and shaking things up, right? And not doing business as normal, and getting parents on board, and and having those real conversations and bringing real examples so that individuals who may not have a child who identifies as queer or on the the spectrum anywhere, right? Like, and explain to them what it means from a personal level, and giving each individual language, right? And what I've learned, and I'm 45 since we're dropping age, right? Like a long time, right? Is that like if you give individuals voice and if you give individuals language, they'll feel more comfortable around it, right? And so when folks start to feel more comfortable about having these conversations, they then will challenge at home functions, at holidays, at their churches, and have strong conversations that eventually then do ripple into the communities. And that's what Edmonds did and had me come in and do. And I was so grateful for that, because that is the dopest work that can ever be done in a community. I wish growing up I had that in a community, right? I mean, like we didn't. And so we just had to figure out and hope we got through.
I'll add very quickly. The first two things I did on my school board was pass a policy barring Sheriff Joe from being able to sweep our schools back during the SB 1070 days. And those parents were primarily monolingual, Spanish-speaking, undocumented families. They were so hyped to join the next cause that we did, which was to create an all-inclusive anti-bullying policy that had some LGBT parents, but had primarily monolingual, Spanish-speaking, undocumented families fighting for it. And it's because they understood that every kid should feel safe. And they understood the struggle that if your child is quiet and feeling bullied or unsafe in a classroom, no matter the reason, they're not going to succeed. And creating those sort of alliances really are so impactful. And it's really what I think we as LGBTQ people can bring to the table for all kids and families. So running from school board, for school board to creating alliances to just speaking up and saying what you know is right, I think is the way to go.
We also have a lot of parents in our parents group that now watch and see what kind of bills are coming before the legislature, and then they sign up to talk, or they send letters or what have you, because parents can connect with other parents in a way that no one else can. And so when you talk about the love you have for your child, and you talk about the struggles and the pain you feel because of the pain your child is having because of some of these policies, I think that goes much further than anything else that we can possibly do. I've also seen with the parents, because they pretty much help each other in the parents group, is that they've learned to recognize that if they have toxic people in their lives that are maybe not using the right pronoun, maybe, making snide comments or whatever, that they're going to have to get rid of those people in their lives for the sake of their children. And that's what they do. And also just speaking up. I mean, I remember years and years ago, I interviewed Representative Barney Frank. And I remember at the time I said, what can we do to get our rights? And he said, you have to come out. And this is long before, people were really coming out. And it's the same thing. Parents that have LGBT kids or kids on the spectrum or whatever it has to be, have to be vocal, and they have to tell their stories.
Anything else to add? All right, so now we'll move on. So we've talked about the students and we've talked about the parents. Now we're going to move internal and talk about the teachers and the staff and school policies. So the next question revolves around training, and what resources and training should educators receive to better understand and address LGBTQ+ issues?
I mean, I guess I can go and say that I think they should get any and all. So I know that that's like a broad statement, but I think one of the things I think each year, I think it should be ongoing, recurring, and updating and revising, because although I joked about my age, which is not true, I remember when there was only the G and the L, and then the B and then the T, and then as the letters have come, and all the different formations of identity, I think that it becomes very important for us to understand what all those mean and how people also then interpret that, because my understanding of, or my actual realization of my identity may not actually translate to what we generally know. And so I think those are conversations that we need to have. But then also I think, it goes back into, I think, the dialogue between safe space and brave space. I think we need to know ways in which, one may transition could be different, how one identifies, again, in other areas, may not be germane to how we understand it. And I want to go back and say, I'm cautious of language that says we need to come out. And I think for those people who can come out, should come out. For those people who cannot come out, they need to be able to identify the ways in which they want their identity to be understood. And I think that, and so I think when we get into outing, when we get into formation again about identity, I think that those are always conversations that we need to have and let those members of the faculty, the staff, our teachers know, because for everybody, it's going to be somewhat different.
100%. And I think as well, letting our faculty and administrators know that when you take risks, you're going to lose something. And usually it's something personal, right? It might be a colleague, it might be friends, but ultimately that risk will produce a product that is positive. And if the ultimate goal is to support students and youth, et cetera, all of us, right? Then probably that risk is worth going into. I also think about some of my faculty at Highline, who I work with and provide training to on the regular, but also individuals who are teaching at the younger levels in K-12, right? And I remind them, like, where is your curious mind? Like, where is your curious person? Because that's what you are learning as an educator. You're learning to be creative, to think critically, and adjust and journey with your students to think critically as well, and to be curious. And as you're navigating this world of work around queerness and gender and expression and identity, and the list goes on, right? Like, where are you being curious, and how are you being intentional with that curiosity? What kind of questions are you asking? If somebody is making a derogatory comment or a bad joke, how are you questioning so that the individual who made the comment doesn't necessarily feel shamed? Because we want to have a conversation with that individual, but how do we be curious enough to ask a question that makes them think, oh, I don't know why I made that joke, right? And so I would say being curious, and again, I think any training and all training, bring folks in. I think, if we think about individuals in our community who are leaders and movers and shakers, hire us into your institutions, hire us into your school districts to do work, right? Who have the pulse of the street and the community and know. And sometimes learning and adjusting comes better from people outside your institution. And I guess I would just leave with that.
Gina, does 1 in 10 offer training to outside organizations? I know a lot of nonprofit organizations, I've seen a trend in them offering trainings.
Sure, we have a staff actually that go out and do the trainings, and they've gone into some schools, some government agencies, private businesses, other nonprofits. And they do a really great job, but our issue here in Arizona is for the K through 12 schools, because like I said, we have a superintendent that has said, here are things that you cannot do. And so that's why I feel that the parents have got to come out and they have got to talk about the fact that how it impacts their child, and to check those policies so that if that school doesn't have it, go to another school that does protect all youth. Because years ago, when we had our high school here, we had our first straight child come in like 8 years ago, I think it was. And she wandered into my office one day and she said, I'm not gay or lesbian. And I said, well, that's okay. And my thought in my head is, why is she specifically saying this? Are the kids making fun of her, even though we have these safe space guidelines? And so then she said, I'm on the spectrum. And I go, oh, okay. And so we talked about that for a little bit. And then I said, well, how do you like it here? How are you being treated? And she said, it's the best thing ever. For the first time in my life, no one has made fun of me. And for the first time, I finished an assignment on time. This past May, I had the privilege to go to NAU, watch her graduate, and she'd had a scholarship, and for the full ride scholarship the whole time. And her parents had said every school she had been in, because of the different things she did because of being on the spectrum, she was made fun of. And so just getting a child, if it doesn't work at one school, get them in somewhere else where they can, because every child deserves that chance of not having anything else interfere so they can realize their full potential.
And Lawrence, you were going to say something?
I was just going to add, Dina was talking about the training that 1 in 10 does, but I think one of the lessons that we need to train everyone on is that the school boards and the sort of not as sexy positions such as superintendent of public instruction matter, right? We've got a social worker who I personally can attest is one of the best human beings in the world, who's our governor, who is, a big fan of 1 in 10, came and testified in my school district for our anti-bullying initiative, right? I mean, really stellar governor in Katie Hobbs. But you look at this position further down the totem pole, the superintendent of public instruction, and then that person in that position is withholding a lot of the rights that the governor can't even protect us with. And so looking at the fact that, most school boards have an absence, I think it's 33% of board positions in the state of Arizona are currently open on school boards and could be appointed by one of these parents we're discussing, or one of these students who has graduated from the K-12 system and wants to come back and be a board member. And so I think that's one of the true lessons, is that you can't take your eye off of the prize, and that you have to look for opportunities where they lie. And sometimes it's not in the headlines, it's in the trenches doing the work.
Absolutely. When we think about 1 in 10, of course, you have inclusive policies in your school. I don't know, with everybody being in the education field or background, if you can think of any successful examples of LGBTQ plus inclusive policies that are in schools now, and how can we make them more widespread?
Well, I didn't want to cut you off. I can speak to Northern Arizona University. Go Jacks. I think I know the student that you're talking about that graduated. I'm not sure, but I think I know who they are. One of the beautiful things that we've had that I think, and again, we still have issues and concerns, bounds that we do, but I think when it comes to transgender, for Northern Arizona, we have one of the biggest outreaches when it comes to just transgender healthcare. I think inclusion, looking at, the bathroom, the state of the bathroom bills, and having neutral bathroom policies, talking about sexual orientation. Years ago, prior to me coming to the Office of Inclusion, and the actual name is Office of Inclusion, Multicultural, and LGBTQI plus Student Services here at NAU. Large, beautiful space that they've crafted out for our students to come, but basically it's provided that space for students to come and feel comfortable, be who they are. And so I think in doing that, and then having, again, those trainings and understandings about what our policies are, and the fact that I do think, and especially now with the current administration, they really do look at and they take into account one's identity, bullying, those issues that would stop someone from getting an education, very seriously. And so, and they listen to those of us who are at lowly levels to a certain degree, who are with the students and actually able to bring those stories, those initiatives, and those narratives to them in such a way that they become compelling, and they're not just, surface level, but they actually get down and do work and create policy and procedure that will help benefit our students.
Yeah, I think push, right? Like we have to push and make these things happen. One of the things I tell students all the time is, you all have more power than I ever will as an employee. And so use your power. And for many of the students, they're just like, Joshua, what do you mean? Like, what does that mean? And I'm like, if you all decide to not come to Highline College, we have no tuition. Therefore, what does that mean for the institution? The president's job is now at stake, all of his admin cabinet folks, right? And so you have to use the players in the way that you can to help get across whatever it is. In 2011 at Highline College, I helped establish the LGBTQIA task force. And it was a group of 4 of us who had some common values, visions, and missions, and said, yeah, well, this is too much. And it was driven because students ran a survey on their own on campus, paper and pencil. So this was not a Survey Monkey or anything like that. But, and so they came up with some awesome data that was awesome that we had it, but not so good for the institution. And when you show institutions that their report card is not getting an A++, things start to happen. And so from the LGBTQI task force, we implemented safe zones. And now it's it's so wild to me that it's 2023. So what is that, 12 years ago, right? Like that now we are just navigating a queer center and a queer space, right? Like for students, staff, and faculty to feel safe, but also learn and be educated. And so I think a lot of that, but also you got to find those stakeholders, like who are the people on your campuses that are going to be radical and loud perhaps with you? Who are the individuals who know how to write up policy and grants to help get funding? So the institution says, well, we don't have money, but actually we do because we wrote this grant, right? And so like who are these people and how can you get them integrated in? And a lot of, my practice around that work actually came from NAU. I graduated from there. And worked with Hilda Ladner in the Multicultural Services Department or Student Center. I forget what it was called back then. But, and so learning how policy works, because I'll tell you, academia does not make it easy. We do not make it easy for students to navigate how to file a complaint against an instructor. In fact, it is very intimidating. And so for a student to say, but I have power, how do I navigate this space? We need folks who actually are going to walk and journey with these students as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Any more comments on that question?
I was just going to say, we're getting into the next wave, I guess, of policy that isn't just naming us within the legislation or the protection or our identity group, but is diving a little deeper. A lot of our students who have been kicked out due to their identity are now living on the streets. Talking 7th and 8th graders who are having to find their way to school or sleep on a friend's couch, and all of the rights and responsibilities that a parent might exhibit for a child are no longer there. And so all of those particular issues around homelessness or having your own autonomy to make decisions without a parent who won't sign off for you, drug and mental health counseling, all of these other issues that may not be LGBT specific issues, but we see in a larger degree in our community. Those are our next policy considerations that I think we need to fight for.
Yeah, agree. So Lawrence, you talked a little bit about mental health and Joshua, as did you. The next question, what role, we all know it's a big role, but maybe elaborate on what role does mental health support play in creating safe and supportive spaces for LGBTQ plus students?
Yeah, and I appreciate for this being a part of today's panel because it means the world. I don't think I would be here if I had not engaged in therapy and engaged in exploring a more healthier, different way to look at my own mental health. And so when we offer avenues like that for students, staff, and faculty, right, like we are game changing. We are changing the face of how folks show up. I think, Gina, you mentioned earlier about a student who had no drive, right? Because that's what most people will want to say. They have no motivation. They don't have this X, Y, and Z, right? The reality is that everybody has motivation, everybody has the will, and everybody has choice. What we don't have is equal access. And when we don't have equal access, then that right there is the equalizer, right? And so I think by providing more options, providing more information about what mental health really is. Growing up Latino and in a small town, and everybody was like, you do not do therapy. You actually talk to your parents, or you talk to your people, or you talk to your priest. And well, let's face it, you're going to get a very biased approach from them. And so understanding that it's going to take time to inform folks about therapy and mental health and what it looks like. Also understanding that it's not just mental health, it's emotional health, right? So like, how are you feeling about the day really is tied to how you're psychologically thinking about it, right? And so if both aren't in sync and both aren't good, or in a place that is manageable and can allow you to navigate the day-to-day, going to school is the second and third option for you. And so, Lawrence, as you were mentioning, those students are on the streets, right? Their number one priority is just survival, the day-to-day, and so we have failed those students already And so how can we navigate back into their life, right? And how can we be preventative to individuals and be on the game, right? About like people's symptoms, like what is it looking like? And really what is it feeling like? There's a really great opportunity for staff and faculty, administrators to get some really good training, even if you're not a therapist. And it's called mental health first aid. And mental health first aid really teaches individuals how to have those conversations that help an individual talk about what's really going on with them, if they're seeking help, and if they're not, if they know where they can get some services and guidance around that. And so I think that is really a great place to start with our administrators, our school districts, et cetera. I'm a certified trainer in first aid mental health, and I think it's fantastic. And when you have faculty say things like, wow, I now know how to have these conversations with individuals who are in distress. And then I reframe it and say, you've had those skills. Now we've just given you some language, right? Having them be more comfortable talking about it is key.
Thank you. Any other comments about mental health playing a role? So we have any other comments? No, we have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to have a last question about giving advice, particularly to students. What advice can you give to LGBTQ plus students returning back to school who may feel uncomfortable or not safe or not heard?
I was just going to say that, it never gets easier, right? The adolescence and going through your K through 12 experience is just never, easy, because it's a battlefield, it's a trial, and to test, how you're going to stand up to these folks. And let's face it, once you get out into the real world, after school, whether it's college or career, you're still going to face a lot of these individuals, and they're going to be just as adamantly opposed to you having a voice or a seat at the table. And so I would say, understanding and being empathetic of that humanity, that you never master it, you never solve it. You may have to come out for the rest of your life. Every single day, you may have to come out, and you may have to fight the bigot. Right, and fight is a loaded term here, and you may have to, modify your language and learn as you go. Right, but that's what life is about, and I think that LGBT people do it more. We do it more openly. We have to, right? We're in the space where our lives are at stake, and our rights are in play. And so get used to it. Find the folks who can support you, because it's not easy, but be human, and you find someone who can help you be human through it.
Thank you, Lawrence. Any other advice that you would give?
I mean, I guess if I could follow up on that is, I think one, definitely, as Lauren said, embrace, who you are, embrace your identity. Understand that to a certain extent that you have to walk around with a level of grace, and sometimes you have to bless those, and I put that in quotes, who will never understand you, because those who know will, and those who don't never will. And so therefore you have to give a level of empathy just for that which they don't know. I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so while we do have certain strides that we've made in all areas, it's crazy to think of just the ways in which we fall back when we do. You would like to believe that your best ally is going to be the person that shares your identity, but sometimes your best ally and your best confidant, your best accomplice, and your best advocate is probably going to be someone that you don't know. So always be open to know people may have your back even when you don't think they have your back. If someone misgenders you or gives you the wrong label, sometimes it's just a mistake. Everybody makes one, so give them the opportunity to correct it. Don't go off, on them, and I get it completely. But I think, again, you will find, and you will get there to a place to where with great advice and great people will come an understanding of who you are. And I think that's the true beauty of being able to go through all this, is to find your better self and your better nature. And I think that's just keep striving until you get there.
Thank you. How about you, Gina, for those students not attending 1 in 10 and that feel uncomfortable or not safe returning to their schools?
Well, I'm 65, so I've seen a lot of things over 65 years. And the one thing that people always tried to say how LGBT youth were more suicidal. They were all of this, had more drug addiction, they had all of these types of things. And so what I would say to LGBT youth is LGBT youth are the most resilient youth I've ever seen in my life. They have to be. And so you get to choose who you come out to, who you don't come out to. You don't have to do it all the time. Just keep in mind that particularly if you're in K through 12, is things do actually get better. And that's the whole reason that 1 in 10 was formed, was just so that young people could see that you could grow up to be an LGBT adult and do a job that you like to do, have a family, and have a good, fulfilling life. And so it does come, just hold on to that dream.
Any last words, Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the best gifts we all have, and it's free, is the gift of choice. Being here tonight, right, is a decision and a choice that we've all actively made. And instilling that, I think, in our youth, and that they have that one thing, right? Our youth and our older communities, right, are really the most oppressed communities. And so allowing individuals to feel what they're feeling, to engage in whatever the anxiety is, and hopefully they have folks at home who can support that. Hopefully they have individuals in their lives that can say, wow, yeah, that is really crummy. That doesn't feel good. I get that. And might be able to share a story of their own of school. And also, I think, to remind them that they do get to invite people to come in, actually, right? Come into their life. And I think when individuals learn that, like, oh, wow, it really is about me coming into my own and understanding who I am. And really in the arena, right, like everybody outside doesn't matter. And that comes later on, that gift and that knowledge and wisdom. But like early on as youth, like coming into them and who do they want to invite in, and grab a hold of those individuals. Maybe it's a TA at their school, or maybe it's a teacher who offers lunchtime for individuals who aren't typical, right? Or aren't normal, whatever that means, right? And so like grab onto those individuals and allow them to be as open if they can as possible. And what I do like about what Gina said is that it is possible at some point. It's going to be a hard struggle, as everybody else has said. It's going to be a battle, but in the end, it's kind of worth it. And I guess I would leave with that, is that it is worth it.
Thank you. Well, that wraps up our monthly Molly Tommy panel. Thank you, incredible panelists, for participating tonight. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. I'll see you on Molly Tommy.